There are two honest ways to begin a story about the first king of China. One is to step back into legend, to speak of Yu, the Great, who, the oldest stories say, tamed the Great Flood and founded the Xia dynasty, an almost mythic figure who, for centuries, stood in histories and songs as the first of China's rulers. The other is the sharper, more modern answer most people mean when they say first king today. Qin Shi Huang, the man who, in 221 BC, after years of murderous conflict between rival states, called himself the first emperor and welded the warring lands into a single empire. Both answers belong to different parts of China's memory. One to myth and moral example, the other to conquest, law, and structures that reshaped an entire civilization. Imagine, then, a boy born into a fractious world. He arrived as Yin Zhang, son of a minor king in a merciless age, when iron met ambition and armies marched like weather systems. As a child, he watched courtiers maneuver and generals parade. But he also listened to the spiteful whisper of threats, assassinations, betrayals, sudden reversals of power. At 13, he became the nominal ruler of Qin because fate and funerals thrust a crown upon his head. For years, he moved through the world like a shadow, learning to make his shadow longer, studying maps, listening to strategists, watching how law bent people, how roads bound men and goods, how inscriptions and money could speak where words failed. The state of Qin itself, in the northwest, had survived by being relentless and organizing men as if they were parts in a great machine. Yin Zhang would take that machine and try to rebuild the world with it. The path from boy king to emperor was not sudden. It was a long, bloody calculus. Yin Zhang and his ministers, especially the brilliant but ruthless Li Si and the political figure El Bui, worked through intrigue and war to break the ancient order of feudal lords. Over the course of a decade, armies from Qin advanced like a river that finally cut a new channel. One by one, they swallowed the 6 other great states Han, Shaowei, Ku, Yan, and Qi. When Yin Zheng finally declared himself Shuangdi, the first sovereign emperor, he was not merely accepting a new title. He was announcing that the old patchwork of kings and nobles would be replaced by a single, centralized authority, answerable to him alone. That act, unification under a single emperor, changed the map and imagination of China forever. Think of the first acts of an architect who believes he alone understands the grain of the world. Qin Shi Huang set about remaking names and measures. He ordered a single standard of weights and measures, pushed for a uniform script so that a merchant in the north could read the same character as a clerk in the south, and introduced a common currency. Roads were straightened, canals were dug, laws were written down and enforced with a severity that made order visibly and terrifying. These changes sound dry when listed, but imagine a land where disparate peoples finally find their letters match one another, where coins click the same tongue in every province. The unification of language and measurements knitted commerce and communication together in a new way, not merely a matter of government efficiency, but the scaffolding for a single civilization. Yet the scaffolding had iron nails. Qin's idea of unity required the suppression of dissent, the century of conflicting philosophies that had flowered across the states, Confucians arguing for ritual and moral rule, Taoists whispering about harmony, others adoring different teachings, was a threat to an emperor who wanted only predictable, measurable obedience. Qin's ministers, most notably Li Si, championed legalism, a philosophy that prized law, state power, and harsh penalties over tradition and moral suasion. In the emperor's determination to prevent the past from inspiring resistance, he ordered widespread destruction of texts that seemed to celebrate older loyalties, and his reign carried out punishments so cruel that later historians writing with shock and moral outrage recorded book burnings and the execution of scholars. The image of an emperor burning books and burying dissenting scholars alive has haunted our view of him ever since. A ruler who would erase memory to secure his memory in stone. Power bred spectacle. If a ruler wanted to announce his eternal reach, he'd built for eternity. Qin Shi Huang ordered massive public works walls raised and linked across precarious ridgelines. Rivers bound, networks of roads that let armies and ideas speed from one end of the empire to the other. It is tempting to call these works the beginnings of the Great Wall, though the wall we picture today is the product of many dynasties. Still, under Qin's watch. Fortifications were connected and extended by the sweat of conscripted millions, farmers torn from their fields, and men who would never see their villages again. Their bones, anonymous at first, became the silent cost of a new order. Think of a horizon rearranged by human hands, a map that declares, from here on, this is one land, and someone stands at its center. The cost of that clarity was measured in blood, and the memory of coerced labor would shadow Qin's splendors. But perhaps no project more clearly mixed the emperor's vanity with his fear than the tomb he planned for himself. Legends and official records mingle Sima, Qion's ancient histories. Later archaeological hints, but the story is compelling. He directed the construction of a necropolis scaled for a world beyond death, an underground city designed to mirror the world above. In 1974, peasant farmers digging a well in Shanxi province struck clay figures that turned out to be part of that buried reality. Thousands upon thousands of life-size terracotta soldiers, chariots, and horses arrayed as if ready to march the emperor into the afterlife. The Terracotta Army is not a metaphor, but a physical army, silent guard whose faces vary, who wear different armor, and who hint at a workshop system sophisticated enough to make individual soldiers in numbers previously unimaginable. The discovery rewired modern understanding of Qin's funerary ambitions. This was not modest burial, but the engineering of immortality. The man behind the monuments was complicated. Qin Shi Huang was both visionary and paranoid. He agonized over the boundary between life and death. He sought elixirs, consulted alchemists, and swallowed substances that promised eternal life. Those substances, often mercur-based, may have hastened his actual demise. Ancient records tell of omens and meteors, of prophecies that angered him, and of tours he took across his empire to inspect its provinces and make himself visible to his subjects. Each tour was an attempt to see his realm close up and to remind distant people that a single sovereign connected them. But it was on one such tour, far from the capital, that the emperor fell gravely ill. He died in 210 BC, still young by modern standards, his death wrapped in mystery, suspected by later writers to be linked to the very potions he took to avoid death. Even death did not end the performance. The tomb hidden beneath an unexcavated mound and the attendant terracotta guardians suggests more than simple burial. They hint at an emperor who compelled the world to mirror his view of power. There are ancient stories of artisans sealed inside to preserve secrets. There are modern surveys detecting anomalous mercury levels, consistent with descriptions of rivers in the subterranean palace small. Eerie confirmations that the accounts, at least in part, were rooted in real designs. Archaeology has peeled away layers of rhetoric and myth and shown a team of state planners, craftsmen, and forced laborers collaborating on something huge and singular. The tomb remains largely unexcavated, partly out of respect for preservation, and partly because modern scientists fret over how to open such a complex without destroying what they hope to study. The site, then, is both a promise and a riddle, an unfinished chapter in the emperor's attempt to become a permanent feature of the landscape. If the story tilts toward drama, it is because Qin's life itself read like drama. Palace plots, an attempted coup, failed assassinations, and the relentless grinding of state building. There were those who plotted to kill him and who crawled toward his carriage with murderous intent. There were ministers who schemed for advantage. The emperor's response was methodically cruel. Suspicion hardened into purges, and the machinery of law permitted the state to crush or exile dissent. He installed governors answerable only to him, a system that made central power intensely visible. But with that visibility came a brittle quality: the empire, welded together by force rather than shared traditions, would not long outlive its founder. Within a few years of Qin Shi Huang's death, rebellions and internal collapse ended the dynasty he had forged. The empires that followed learned from both his methods and his mistakes, borrowing his systems of standardized currency, script, and administration, while rejecting the extremes that made his reign feared. Pause here and consider the human contours beneath the history. Imagine a mosaic of moments. A young emperor learning from a minister how to read a map. An anxious emissary returning with news of a siege. A blacksmith in a mountain village striking coins that will travel for centuries. a scholar hiding scrolls that might be burned, a mother in a rural field sent with her son to the roadworks, never to return. Qin's reforms created order and possibility, the kind of order that lets cities flourish, and ideas cross regions. They also created scars. The scale of his projects: roads, walls, canals. Tombs carried both the genius and the cruelty of a system that saw people primarily as cogs for a vast state machine. Stories like this don't end in tidy moral lines. In modern China, Qin Shi Huang is a complex figure, at times admired as the founder of national unity, at times reviled for cruelty. His life forces us to ask what we want from leadership. Are we willing to accept iron discipline for the sake of coherence, or do we prize liberty so highly that even stability seems suspicious? The man who distrusted scholars and burned books also ordered measures that made a literate, connected civilization more possible. He who crushed rivals also codified currency and script that made trade and law simpler across distances. The legacy is neither wholly black nor wholly white. It is an uneasy mix of creation and destruction. So picture the final scene: a long road leading to the capital, a procession passing under banners that proclaim the emperor's name. At the head, the emperor rides in his carriage, face set like carved stone, a man who believed he could make his memory last forever. Around him, the stunned silence of people who have seen too much victory parades, funerals, conscriptions, and further still, under a mound on a plain in Shanxi. Rows upon rows of clay soldiers stand frozen in an eternal guard hands that once learned to hold spears, now hold silence. They are an army without orders, a final testament to a man who tried to master both life and death. If you close your eyes, you might hear the rattle of chariots, the clink of standard currency, the scratch of brushes as scribes try to keep words alive. You might also hear the soft, unrecorded songs of the people whose names never made it into official chronicles. History, after all, keeps many voices, some stamped into bronze or clay, others only remembered in the quiet of a village tale. Qin Shi Huang's story gathers them all: legend, policy, paranoia, monument, and myth, and asks, in the hushed way of the distant past, what it means to build an empire and what the cost might be. If you want to read more after the story, the most grounded modern accounts lean on classical records like Sima Qian's Shiji, and on archaeological work at the mausoleum near Xi'an, and at various Qin sites, for concise, authoritative overviews of Qin Shi Huang's life and reforms. Britannica and specialist archaeological write-ups give solid summaries. For the Terracotta Army and excavation details, museum and archaeological pages and reputable science outlets are excellent places to see how legend and discovery meet.